At the edge of dawn, when the world is silent and the sky barely breathes, something begins to stir. Quiet at first, then unmistakably divine. A single heart steps into God's presence, unaware that this simple act will ignite a rising tide of Christlike love destined to sweep across the earth. Darkness trembles. Atmospheres shift. Communities awaken as heaven draws closer with every passing moment. What begins as a whisper becomes a roar, an unfolding story of glory breaking through the veil, rewriting lives and shaking creation to its core. This is the moment the world has waited for. This is the dawn of awakening. This morning, at the earliest breath of dawn, eyewitnesses report an unusual stillness settling across the world. The sky, brushed only lightly with the first hints of gold, appears to pause, as though creation itself is holding its breath. Atmospheric observers describe the moment as a hush before something holy, signaling that this sunrise is unlike any other. Sources close to the scene confirm that a lone believer steps forward into this quiet hour, carrying not routine but expectancy. There is no hurried agenda, no buzzing notifications, no clamor of everyday life. Instead, the environment is charged with anticipation, as though heaven has scheduled a sacred appointment meant only for those who dare to seek it. According to spiritual correspondence, a holy stirring begins to sweep through the atmosphere. It is subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but quickly grows into a powerful sense of divine nearness. Analysts describe it as a kind of moment that interrupts ordinary life with extraordinary grace, marking the start of something deeply personal and profoundly supernatural. Witness reports indicate that as a believer steps into God's presence, the heart responds instinctively, softening, opening, awakening. This is not a passive encounter. It is an intentional surrender, a turning of the inner eyes toward the one who has been waiting for the night hours to meet them. Love, warm and unmistakable, begins to rise like the sun itself. Experts in spiritual dynamics note that this moment carries the unmistakable signs of a divine invitation. The believer is not simply beginning another day. They are being drawn into an encounter. A news bulletin from the inner soul confirms increasing awareness, heightened sensitivity, and a deepening sense of God's voice whispering, calling, stirring. As the sun finally breaks over the horizon, officials in the realm of faith declare the moment a spiritual ignition. The day has not merely begun. It has been awakened. With a heart open wide and Christ's love beginning to move like a rising tide, the believer steps into morning, not alone, not unchanged, but filled with a holy expectancy that will shape everything that follows. Following the pre-dawn spiritual ignition reported earlier, new developments are emerging as a believer steps deeper into the unfolding encounter. Sources on the ground confirm a dramatic shift in atmosphere. What began as a gentle stirring has now intensified into a sacred unveiling. The presence that hovered at dawn now presses closer, calling for honesty, transparency, and surrender. Observers stationed near the heart's inner chambers report that the believer is entering a vulnerable phase. Emotional barriers, long-standing defenses, and silent burdens begin to surface. These personal truths, once tucked away in the shadows, are now moving center stage under the dawning light of divine love. Early reports indicate a trembling honesty rising within the soul. Fear, weariness, and hidden struggles are voluntarily being brought forward. Analysts describe this as a controlled collapse, not destruction, but release. The believer is offering God the fragments of yesterday, trusting that no piece is too ugly or too fragile for his hands. Spiritual correspondents are detecting a surge of heaven-sent reassurance. As confessions rise like incense, evidence of grace begins to flood the atmosphere. It appears that every admission of weakness is immediately met with waves of compassion, prompting experts to identify this moment as a critical turning point in the ongoing encounter. Officials from the Department of Inner Healing confirm that God's response is not delayed, hesitant, or conditional. Reports show he moves swiftly and tenderly, meeting each exposed wound with restorative power. Specialists interpret this as unmistakable proof that divine love is not passive. It actively seeks out broken places to mend them. Witnesses stationed along the emotional horizon report something remarkable. The believer's heart is beginning to soften at an accelerated rate. Areas once cold with disappointment or hardened by past hurts now appear to be melting under the warmth of divine presence. Specialists describe the transformation as the thaw of the soul. The unfolding events have drawn attention from spiritual analysts worldwide, who confirm that this depth of vulnerability is rarely seen without the promise of breakthrough. The surrender taking place is not out of defeat, but out of hope. It is a courageous act rooted in the growing certainty that God is both listening and responding. One insider, speaking anonymously, revealed that the believer senses a profound shift. What once felt like an internal storm now feels like a sacred cleansing. Tears fall, but they carry relief instead of despair. They are being described as evidence of divine detox, the heart releasing what it was never meant to carry. As the emotional outpouring continues, an unverified but compelling report claims that heaven itself is leaning in. The believer is enveloped by an almost tangible love, a love that does not condemn, but welcomes every confession with open arms. Spectators confirm the atmosphere is thick with mercy. And now, as this chapter closes, spiritual authorities declare that the believer's heart is no longer weighed down, but lifted, lighter, freer, more open than it has been in a long time. The morning encounter has deepened into something transformative. With nothing left hidden and everything surrendered, the believer stands ready for what comes next, a torrent of Christ's love poised to break through with unstoppable force. Fresh reports are emerging from the spiritual landscape following the believer's profound surrender earlier this morning. Analysts confirm that the vulnerability documented in the previous chapter has triggered an unexpected and powerful response from heaven. What began as gentle waves of reassurance is now escalating into a full-scale outpouring of divine love. Sources close to the encounter describe the atmosphere as electrically sacred. Moments ago, witnesses observed what they can only describe as a sudden surge, an eruption, of Christ's love cascading through the believer's heart. It appears the confession and openness previously reported have opened the floodgates to something far more intense than anticipated. Spiritual correspondents report that the love now being experienced is not a mild comfort, but force, overflowing, relentless, overwhelming in its purity. Experts tracking the encounter note that this is not simply emotional. It is transformative, penetrating layers of the heart untouched by any earthly affection. A wave of healing is sweeping through the believer's inner world with seismic impact. Past wounds are not merely soothed, they are being rewritten. In moments, shame dissolves. Guilt evaporates. Fear loses its grip. Observers describe the effects as instantaneous restoration, the kind of dramatic shift rarely seen outside divine intervention. Eyewitnesses stationed along the spiritual horizon report that the believer's soul appears to be expanding, rising, opening wider as the torrent continues. Specialists are calling it heart enlargement, not physical, but spiritual capacity increasing to contain more of Christ's boundless love. Reports are now confirming radiant signs of renewal. Hope, once flickering faintly, is blazing. Joy, long dormant, has begun to surge with new strength, surprising even seasoned analysts. It is becoming clear that this outpouring is not simply filling the believer. It is recreating them from the inside out. An inside source reveals that the believer is experiencing a powerful awareness of being seen, known, and cherished. This love is not abstract or distant. It is deeply personal. Witnesses say the atmosphere feels thick with divine closeness, as though Christ himself is drawing nearer with every passing moment. Across every corner of the believer's emotional landscape, new life is erupting. Where heaviness once lingered, freedom now rushes in like wind through open gates. Spiritual authorities describe this phenomenon as a love storm, a dramatic, heaven-driven force dismantling inner darkness and flooding every space with light. Experts monitoring the unfolding event now confirm that resistance has vanished. The believer is no longer bracing against the force of love, but is yielding fully, carried by the current of Christ's compassion. It is a surrender not of defeat, but of awe, as they realize they are being filled beyond measure. New reports are arriving from the spiritual front lines following the unprecedented surge of Christ's love witnessed in the previous chapter. Analysts confirm that the outpouring has not subsided. It has shifted. The torrential love that swept through the believer has now begun forming into something structured, intentional, and fiercely protective, as though heaven is outfitting them for a divine mission. Sources observing the transformation describe a striking phenomenon. The believer stands in stillness, yet the atmosphere around them pulses with purpose. The love that flooded their heart moments ago now reconfigures itself, gathering like luminous armor taking shape piece by piece. Witnesses say the process appears both tender and formidable, combining gentleness with unmistakable strength. Spiritual correspondents report that the first layer settling over the believer is peace. Thick, radiant, unshakable peace. This is not the fragile calm known on earth. It is a supernatural covering. Observers describe it as a shield that settles over the mind, silencing anxieties and stabilizing the soul with the weight of divine assurance. Moments later, a second wave of transformation activates. Officials monitoring the encounter confirm that courage, shimmering, bold, and alive, wraps around the believer's chest like a breastplate. This courage is not self-generated. It's heaven-forged. Analysts note a dramatic rise in spiritual resilience, suggesting the believer is being prepared for opposition, not crushed by it. Eyewitnesses have now detected a belt-like band forming around the believer's being. Investigators identify it as truth, steady, grounding, and unmovable. Experts explain that this divine truth doesn't merely inform the believer, it anchors them, preventing lies, doubt, and confusion from gaining even the smallest foothold. In a stunning development, specialists report that compassion and mercy have begun weaving into the armor like glowing threads. These aren't ornamental details, they are strategic reinforcements. Observers note that the believer's posture shifts, becoming both firmer and kinder at the same time, suggesting this divine armor is crafted for both battle and blessing. A sudden surge of brilliance erupts around the believer's feet. Correspondents confirm this new layer as readiness, the willingness to walk wherever love demands. Witnesses describe the sensation as holy momentum, a supernatural empowerment that prepares the believer to carry Christ's love into difficult places with unwavering resolve. Meanwhile, spiritual analysts observe a radiant force surrounding the believer's heart and mind. This component of the armor is identified as faith, dynamic, living, and impossible to extinguish. Experts explain that this faith acts not just as protection, but as propulsion, enabling the believer to move forward boldly despite uncertainties. Reports indicate that the atmosphere has grown intensely charged. Christ himself seems to be standing near, overseeing the completed armor with the authority of a king preparing a warrior. Observers note a profound shift. The believer no longer looks fragile or overwhelmed. They stand grounded, strengthened, and luminous, transformed into a vessel of unstoppable love. In a final astonishing development, spiritual authorities officially declare the equipping phase complete. The believer is no longer merely restored. They are commissioned. The love that once healed them now empowers them. Wrapped in heaven's armor, their mission is clear: to confront darkness not with force, but with a love so strong, so radiant, so Christ-shaped that nothing can stand against it. Fresh developments are emerging from the spiritual realm, following the believer's full equipping with the divine armor of love. Officials confirm that no sooner was the armor secured than the atmosphere around the believer shifted sharply. What had been a radiant chamber of empowerment has now given way to a darker, heavier landscape, signaling the approach of unseen opposition. Correspondents stationed at the scene report that the air has thickened with tension. Shadows, metaphorical yet unmistakably present, begin to gather at the edges of the believer's path. Analysts interpret this as a predictable reaction. Whenever divine love is weaponized, darkness rises in protest. Yet observers emphasize a critical detail. The believer is not afraid. Footage from spiritual monitors reveals the believer's armor shimmering brighter in the encroaching gloom. Each piece forged from Christ's love now responds actively to surrounding darkness, glowing with protective power. Experts describe the phenomenon as holy luminosity, a divine countermeasure that intensifies in direct proportion to the opposition. Reports confirm that the first wave of challenge arrives in the form of internal whispers, doubt, insecurity, old wounds attempting a resurgence. But specialists note that these attacks dissipate instantly as the armor, truth, and peace intercepts them. Analysts state that the believer's mind remains steady, unshaken by the shadow's attempt to regain influence. A second assault follows, this time due to external pressures, circumstances, discouragements, unexpected obstacles. Witnesses confirm that fear attempts to gain a foothold, but the shield of faith rises instinctively, blocking every blow. Correspondents describe the impact as faith meeting darkness like lightning striking stone. In a surprising twist, spiritual officials report that the believer does not simply resist darkness, they advance. Empowered by Christ's love, they step forward with boldness, moving directly into the areas where despair, anger, and bitterness once held dominion. Experts are calling this a love offensive, a strategic counterattack fueled not by force but by compassion. Eyewitnesses on the scene report a dramatic transformation. Where the believer walks, the atmosphere changes. Hostility softens. Heavy places lighten. Darkness recoils. Analysts confirm that it is not the believer's strength causing the shift, but the radiance of Christlike love emanating from within the armored vessel. Further developments indicate that the believer engages not with aggression, but with supernatural gentleness, speaking words of grace where conflict once brewed, offering forgiveness where wounds once festered. Experts note that darkness appears confused by these tactics, unable to withstand a love that is both fierce and tender. As the confrontation intensifies, witnesses confirm a decisive turning point. The darkness that once loomed large now begins to crumble. Fear collapses. Shame dissolves. The atmosphere brightens with unmistakable signs of victory. Analysts declare that the believer's Christ-shaped love has proven stronger than any weapon raised against them. In an official statement released by spiritual authorities a moment ago, it is confirmed that the believer has successfully pushed back the forces of darkness not by might, but by love, a love fortified, sharpened, and unleashed by Christ himself. This victory is more than personal. It is prophetic. It signals that the believer is now prepared for the next phase, becoming a beacon of healing to the world beyond the battlefield. New reports are flooding in after the believer's stunning victory over the advancing darkness. Officials confirm a remarkable shift. The battleground atmosphere has dissolved, giving way to a dawning light radiating from the believer themselves. Analysts watching the scene describe the transformation as a spiritual sunrise contained within a single soul. Correspondents at the site reveal that the believer, once fighting through waves of opposition, now stands illuminated, their armor shimmering like liquid gold. What was previously defensive protection has evolved into radiant empowerment. Experts clarify that this is not residual glow from the previous battle. This is a new activation, signaling that the believer is transitioning from warrior to healer. Witnesses report that a gentle, irresistible warmth begins to pour outward from the believer, touching everything within reach. Specialists identify the phenomenon as compassion overflow, a supernatural extension of Christ's love designed to mend, soothe, and restore. The atmosphere responds instantly, softening as though creation itself recognizes the healing presence. Sources embedded in nearby communities confirm that this radiant love does not stay contained. It travels. It moves. It reaches those burdened by heartbreak, anxiety, and silent suffering. Reports indicate that individuals who come near the believer are experiencing sudden peace, unexpected clarity, and relief from emotional heaviness without a single word being spoken. A breaking update from spiritual analysts reveals that the believer's voice has taken on new strength. When they speak, their words carry healing properties, comfort that calms storms, truth that uproots lies, affirmation that revives weary hearts. Witnesses describe these words as balm-laced, restoring confidence and dignity to those who have long felt unseen. Correspondents also confirm that the believer's presence itself has become a catalyst for transformation. Tension dissolves in their shadow. Conflict weakens near their steps. Analysts observing group interactions report a striking phenomenon. Hostility diminishes simply because they enter the room. This shift is being labeled the radius of restoration. Specialists monitoring the believer's movements note that their actions, small, deliberate, and compassionate, carry disproportionate impact. A gentle smile restores hope. A moment of listening breaks isolation. An act of kindness dismantles bitterness. Experts emphasize that these effects are not natural. They bear the unmistakable signature of Christ's power working through a yielded heart. In a stunning development, eyewitnesses report that people burdened by past wounds are beginning to gravitate toward the believer as though drawn by an invisible force. They are not seeking advice. They are seeking the presence, the love, the peace that radiates from the believer like a lighthouse amid storm-tossed seas. Analysts declare this phase the beginning of a healing awakening. Officials from the spiritual department of restoration confirm that the believer is now functioning as a living conduit of divine love. The torrent received earlier has not only filled them, it now flows freely through them, restoring those who cross their path. Observers say this marks a critical turning point. The believer has become a beacon, shining light into the shadows of others' battles. Breaking reports are emerging as a believer, now functioning as a beacon of healing, steps beyond familiar environments and into territories marked by deeper wounds and heavier darkness. Officials confirm that this movement is not accidental. It is a divine assignment. What was once a local radius of restoration is now expanding into a mission field where mercy is not merely needed but desperately craved. Correspondents embedded in these hurting regions describe the atmosphere as volatile. Emotional debris litters the landscape. Betrayal, bitterness, division, and long-held resentment swirl like spiritual storm clouds. Analysts warn that these areas are historically resistant to kindness, often pushing away those who attempt to help. Yet witnesses report that the believer advances without hesitation. Early field reports reveal the first confrontation. The believer steps into the presence of someone hardened by years of disappointment. Observers describe the tension as palpable, like a collision between light and stone. But instead of retreating, the believer responds with radical mercy, offering understanding instead of judgment, patience instead of pressure. Experts note that the hardened exterior begins to crack. New information confirms a growing pattern. The believer repeatedly chooses love where retaliation would be justified. They forgive offenses that others deemed unforgivable. They extend grace to those who weaponize their pain. They show kindness to the hostile, gentleness to the harsh, dignity to the overlooked. Spiritual analysts describe this as mercy warfare, disarming darkness through relentless compassion. Correspondents report a surprising backlash. Some individuals, unaccustomed to unconditional love, react offensively. They question motives, resist help, or lash out in confusion. But specialists monitoring the encounter highlight the believer's extraordinary composure. Instead of withdrawing, the believer remains steady, anchored, patient, unmovable in Christlike compassion. A dramatic development now emerges. Those initially resistant are beginning to soften. Witnesses confirm that walls built over years of hurt are slowly collapsing under the weight of consistent, unwavering mercy. Analysts compare it to watching ice thaw beneath a persistent sun. Gradual, undeniable, transformative. Mercy is proving stronger than hostility. Further reports indicate that the believer's actions are triggering ripple effects. Individuals touched by mercy begin extending the same compassion to others. A chain reaction is forming, wounds being healed, grudges dissolving, relationships cautiously mending. Experts label this phenomenon the mercy cascade, a spreading movement of reconciliation sparked by one obedient heart. Sources now reveal that the believer is being drawn into even deeper emotional battlefields, spaces where betrayal, injustice, and trauma have left scars too deep for human wisdom alone. Yet eyewitnesses testify that the believer enters these spaces clothed in supernatural tenderness. Analysts say this tenderness, infused with divine strength, is dismantling the kind of pain that has resisted healing for years. Officials from the Spiritual Authority of Reconciliation announced that radical mercy is no longer an isolated act. It has become the believer's identity. They are now recognized as a carrier of Christ's redemptive heart, walking into the darkest corners not with fear, but with fierce, compassionate purpose. This mission is reshaping communities and rewriting stories once defined by brokenness. Newly released reports from the spiritual field indicate a monumental shift following the mercy cascade initiated in the previous chapter. Officials confirm that the impact of the believer's radical compassion has stabilized the once fractured regions, leaving behind a landscape transformed by grace. But analysts emphasize that this transformation is not the conclusion. It is a launching point for a daily outpouring of Christ-like love that is only just beginning. Correspondents on the scene report that the believer, having navigated deep emotional terrain and extended mercy where few dare to go, now stands at the threshold of a new dawn. However, unlike the first dawn described back in Chapter 1, this sunrise does not rise around them. It rises within them. Witnesses describe believer as glowing with a steady inner radiance, as though carrying the dawn in their very being. Sources confirm that this inner light is not fading. Instead, it is expanding, strengthening, and pulsing with divine intentionality. Analysts describe this progression as the shift from episodic encounters to continuous overflow, a spiritual stream that runs unbroken, like a river fed by heaven itself. The believer has moved from receiving love to becoming a living outpouring of it. Field reports reveal that as the believer moves forward, the effects of this daily outflow begin to appear instantly. People they encounter, strangers, co-workers, loved ones, even passers-by, show visible signs of uplift. Tight shoulders relax. Troubled expressions soften. Burdens lightened. The believer's presence carries the unmistakable fragrance of Christlike love, altering atmospheres as naturally as breathing. Experts observing the phenomenon identify three distinct qualities in the believer's new daily radiance: constancy, courage, and contagiousness. Constancy, because the love flowing from them no longer fluctuates with circumstances. Courage, because they now speak truth and extend grace with unshakable boldness. Contagiousness, because those touched by the outpouring begin releasing the same love to others. Correspondents now confirm a rising wave of testimonies from people impacted by brief interactions with the believer. A discouraged soul finds unexpected hope. A hostile heart experiences sudden calm. A weary mother reports renewed strength. Analysts call these encounters micro-miracles, daily manifestations of divine love expressed through ordinary moments. Investigators monitoring the spiritual climate report that opposition still exists, but it lacks the power it once held. Darkness no longer overwhelms a believer. It is instead displaced by the consistent shine of Christ's love flowing through them. Specialists note that the believer's armor, received back in Chapter 4, now operates instinctively, requiring no conscious effort. Sources close to the believer reveal a significant internal shift. Their heart is no longer striving to love. It is resting in love, letting Christ's compassion flow effortlessly. Witnesses describe their demeanor as peaceful yet powerful, humble yet influential, grounded yet soaring. This posture, analysts claim, is the unmistakable mark of someone living from overflow, not exhaustion. Officials from the Spiritual Council have issued a formal statement declaring that the believer has entered into their long-term commission. Their life is now a continuous rising, like the sun, dispelling darkness, warming cold places, and awakening dormant hearts everywhere they go. They are not chasing purpose. They are carrying it. Fresh reports are emerging just hours after the believers stepped into their daily outpouring of Christ-like love. Officials confirm that the glow witnessed earlier has not only persisted, it has expanded in reach and intensity. What began as a personal overflow is now causing seismic shifts far beyond the believer's immediate surroundings. Correspondents stationed across multiple spiritual regions describe an unusual activity. Hearts awakening spontaneously, minds clearing unexpectedly, and long-buried hopes rising to the surface in individuals who have never even met the believer directly. Analysts believe this marks the beginning of a widespread ripple effect, an extension of the believer's radiance touching places they themselves have not physically entered. Field agents report that entire environments are responding. Workplaces once cold with tension now show signs of unity. Households previously marked by silence or conflict are experiencing breakthroughs in communication. Even public spaces seem lighter, calmer, infused with a residue of divine love. Experts call this the atmospheric spread, a spiritual phenomenon rare in scope and impact. New data suggests that people affected by the believer's indirect influence are now beginning to imitate what they feel. They speak kinder words. They release grudges. They extend unexpected generosity. Analysts describe this as a secondary wave of transformation, proof that Christ-like love, when ignited, cannot help but multiply. A developing report from the Spiritual Research Division indicates that darkness has taken notice of this rapid expansion. Resistance attempts have reemerged through discouragement, distraction, and subtle emotional attacks aimed at slowing the movement. But observers confirm that the believer's armor remains active, deflecting these assaults as effortlessly as sunlight dissolving shadows. Correspondents now highlight a significant turning point. The believer is no longer operating merely as a healer or a beacon. They have become a catalyst, igniting transformation wherever their influence extends. Witnesses describe their presence as the spark that never goes out, continually reigniting hope in places that have been cold for years. Experts monitoring the believer's spirit report surprise and development, humility deepening even as impact increases. Instead of pride swelling from their influence, there is an even greater reliance on Christ. This dependence fuels the outpouring, keeping the love pure, untainted, and intensely effective. Reports from surrounding communities reveal that individuals formerly trapped in despair are stepping into their own spiritual awakenings. Some are discovering purpose. Others are finding healing. Still others are beginning to shine with their own expressions of Christlike love. Analysts declare that what began with one believer has now become a movement. Officials from the Spiritual Council have issued a statement recognizing this as a historic moment. They report that the believer's surrender, healing, equipping, victory, mercy, and daily outpouring have culminated in an unstoppable wave of transformation sweeping across multiple spheres of life. The movement is no longer dependent on the believer alone. It now has multiple carriers. Newly released reports confirm a dramatic escalation across the spiritual landscape following the unstoppable ripple documented in Chapter 9. Officials now describe the situation not merely as a movement, but as a full-scale awakening. What began with a single believer's surrendered heart has ignited a chain reaction of transformation sweeping across multiple communities with accelerating force. Correspondents stationed in regions previously marked by emotional drought now report unexpected bursts of life. Places known for division are experiencing reconciliation. Homes long shadowed by despair are witnessing renewed hope. Analysts describe the shift as the tide turning, a sweeping reversal of spiritual decay powered by the radiation of Christ's love spreading through ordinary people awakened in extraordinary ways. Shockwaves continue to ripple outward as new individuals, many of whom have never encountered a spiritual awakening before, begin reporting sudden clarity, conviction, and a renewed desire for wholeness. Field agents confirm an exponential increase in compassion-driven actions, apologies long overdue, kindness where tension once reigned, forgiveness extended without explanation. Experts are calling this wave the compassion surge. Spiritual monitors reveal that darkness, now cornered and increasingly destabilized, is attempting last-ditch efforts to regain influence. Confusion, weariness, and unexpected conflicts try to spark up in pockets of resistance. But correspondents report that these attempts collapse quickly under the weight of collective love, now flowing through a growing network of awakened believers. The resistance is weakening dramatically. Analysts observing the original believer note a significant development. They are no longer the brightest light in the movement. Instead, they have become one star in a constellation, an expanding sky of illuminated hearts shining in unity. Witnesses say this shift is not diminishing but empowering, proving that the awakening is bigger than any single vessel. Sources on the ground share evidence of profound unity forming among the awakened. Differences that once divided age, background, personality, past wounds now dissolve in the presence of shared Christ-like love. Communities that once struggled to function together are now operating like living symphonies, each person contributing a unique note to the rising anthem of grace. Correspondents confirm that what sets this awakening apart is its quiet strength. There are no grand displays, no forced emotionalism, no spotlight seeking. Instead, there is steady consistency, daily compassion, humble courage, and unwavering hope. This authenticity is drawing more people in, not by pressure, but by attraction. Analysts call this the magnetism of genuine love. Reports from the Spiritual Council indicate that the movement is now self-sustaining. The flame no longer depends on a few passionate hearts. It burns in many, and with each new heart awakened, the light intensifies. Correspondents note that entire regions are beginning to experience what can only be described as cultural healing, as the atmosphere shifts from heaviness to expectancy. Field observers have captured a powerful scene marking the crescendo of this chapter. Individuals once bound by bitterness now embracing freedom. Families once fractured now holding hands. Friends separated by years of tension now reunited with tears of relief. Analysts declare that such rapid restoration is impossible apart from divine intervention, and yet it is unfolding everywhere. Breaking developments this morning confirm that the Great Awakening documented in Chapter 10 has entered a decisive phase. After days of continuous expansion, spiritual authorities report that the movement has reached a critical threshold, where the rising tide of Christlike love is now pressing against the last strongholds of fear and darkness. Observers say the atmosphere feels electric, charged with both promise and intensity. Correspondents from the field report unsettling resistance emerging in areas previously untouched by the awakening's light. These regions appear to be stirring with agitation, as if ancient shadows are awakening in protest. Analysts describe it as a trembling of darkness, not a resurgence of power, but the panic reaction of forces realizing their influence is being dismantled layer by layer. Despite these tremors, eyewitnesses confirm that awakened believers are standing stronger than ever before. Their unity, forged in the compassion surge of the last chapter, has become a shield. When fear tries to whisper, courage rises. When confusion presses in, clarity responds. Many are saying this is the first time in years that faith feels not only alive but unshakably bold. A key development was reported earlier today involving the original believer, the one who ignited this entire movement at dawn so many chapters ago. Sources confirm they have stepped into a new role, almost without realizing it. Their posture, once hesitant, now carries an unmistakable authority, not dominance, but love matured into leadership. Analysts describe them as a torchbearer whose flame no storm can extinguish. Field reporters note a growing phenomenon among the awakened, a heightened spiritual sensitivity. Many are experiencing sudden moments of divine insight, words of encouragement spoken at precisely the right time, acts of compassion delivered before needs are voiced, prayers rising instinctively like signals sent across a battlefield. Experts identify this as the emergence of collective spiritual discernment. Meanwhile, resistance forces appear increasingly fragmented. Reports show fear attempting to disguise itself as urgency, anxiety posing as responsibility, and old wounds resurfacing in desperate attempts to reclaim territory. But correspondents confirm that each attempt is failing more quickly than the last. Love, flowing in increasing waves, is exposing every tactic with disarming clarity. A dramatic moment occurred at dawn, when dozens of awakened believers gathered at the edge of a valley long known for spiritual heaviness. Witnesses say the atmosphere changed the moment they arrived. The air shifted, as though heaven itself leaned in. Light began spreading across the valley, like a golden tide. Analysts describe it as the first major breach in a fortified region of darkness. Reports reveal that as light entered the valley, no dramatic shouting or forceful declarations were required. Instead, love did the work. Quiet, steady, unquestionable. Darkness lifted not through confrontation, but through the undeniable presence of peace. Witnesses describe the event as a sunrise inside the soul of a land that forgot how to breathe. As news of this breakthrough spread, believers across the region responded instantly. Some dropped to their knees in awe, others raised their hands in gratitude. Many simply wept. Correspondents say there is a growing sense that something monumental is near, not just another wave of awakening, but a culmination, a moment where heaven's purposes will break fully into view. From the first whisper of dawn's stillness to the final rupture of the veil, the world has witnessed a breathtaking ascent of divine awakening, beginning with one heart stepping quietly into God's presence, igniting waves of Christ-like love that swept across valleys, cities, and nations, shattering darkness, uniting believers, unraveling old strongholds, and stirring creation itself into holy resonance. Until at last the heavens split open, glory cascaded like living fire, and the earth stood, trembling beneath the weight of a love so fierce, so pure, and so unstoppable that every chapter, every battle, every rising wave converged into a single, thunderous revelation. Heaven has drawn near, love has prevailed, and the dawn has become a blaze that will never fade.